Steve Basset from the Paradigm Research Group, thank you so much for coming on the show again. How are you, my friend?
I am fine, Dave. It's great to be with you again.
It is always a pleasure to have someone of your stature on this show. You know, we really look up to people like you when you speak, and that's when our audience listens, because your message is so clear and concise that it almost feels like we're getting closer. It almost feels like we're going to see history made here. How are you feeling about that these days?
I feel the same way I feel about the temperature right now, where I'm hanging out in the Southwest. The reason it feels like it's really hot is because it's really hot. It's like hit 121 today. I'll be in Toronto tomorrow, or actually tomorrow night, so thank God. Yeah, look, the situation is looking very favorable. It's complicated, but I guess you could say historical circumstances came together that made it possible to finally drive the media into this issue as part of a major event like a presidential campaign. It wasn't possible before. Tried to do it in 2007, didn't catch. This time it did. And so what we have is kind of a perfect storm, meaning the truth embargo. Think of the truth embargo as the Andrea Gale. And I don't know, think of Secretary Clinton as Billy Tyne. And what's happened is she has sailed her Andrea Gale into the perfect storm. Now, what do I mean by that? One, she's running for president for the second time. Two, she and her husband and quite a few of their close associates are connected to the ET issue through the Rockefeller Initiative back in 1993 to 96 during her husband's administration, which they never talked about and have yet to talk about after 23 years. We have three. We have the records of that event. Grant Cameron got those, and we've had them, available to the press since 2001. That prove it all. Four, the media has finally gotten interested in this because she's running for president. Five, the citizen hearing on disclosure was a great success. This was in 2013. Generated a lot of awareness in Washington on the issue and on the media, took it to another level. Six, PRG then, using that citizen hearing on disclosure as a platform to stand on, launched in November 2014 a full-scale political initiative. And since January, really, of 2015, we're now looking about 19 months. PRG has had quite a few meetings on the Hill with staffers, with various offices of members serving on certain committees, which really hasn't gone anywhere, but the fact that those meetings have even taken place is very important. But most importantly, PRG has engaged a huge number of media about Clinton, the connection to the ET issue, the Rockefeller Initiative, and has generated over somewhere between 200 and 600 articles, if you count foreign language press, since November 2014, connecting Clinton to the ET issue. This is unprecedented. Never happened before. Hundreds and hundreds of articles connecting her to the issue. Mainstream press, New York Times, Times of London, New Republic, New York Magazine, Roll Call, Mother Jones, you name it, Chicago Tribune. And so the thing is now in play in the print journalism. Now, because of that, all of that coverage, but more importantly, because the Clinton people, including her campaign chairman Podesta and others, have been getting calls from these reporters wanting clarification about this Rockefeller Initiative, wanting comment, which they have refused to answer. Now, let me restate that point. They have been contacted, including by the New York Times, with questions about the Rockefeller Initiative, and they have refused to answer. Not a no comment, not a slide to the left or a jig to the right, a no response, period. And why is that important? It's important because that is all the confirmation they need that they are under great pressure and this issue could blow at any time. And for that reason, and that reason alone, Secretary Clinton and her campaign chairman, John Podesta, since February 13th of 2015, have now made about 10 public statements regarding the ET issue, in which they've made it quite clear they take it seriously. They have essentially pulled the ridicule curtain down. And they did it because if they didn't make those statements, and this issue does blow fully out into the public domain, they will be flat-footed. They will have nothing backing them up. And so by doing this, they are ready to confront it head-on should the media challenge them. Now, the media that we're talking about is the television media. Now, the television network news and cable news operations are the most compromised, most ineffective area of journalism in America, vis-a-vis the amount of money that is invested there, the amount of money spent. They're just awful. And so through the 19 debates and forums that took place, in spite of these hundreds of articles all over the world, not a single one of these crack journalists that host these shows that moderated these forums and debates asked her about it. Not a single question. So they kind of glided through that. But they are running out of time. So all of this is the perfect storm that I'm talking about. And then the last thing I'll say is this. All of the comments they've made have only gone up to a certain point. They've been vague, somewhat vague. They have misrepresented history in several instances, though alluding to the truth of the matter, but not actually categorizing it properly. And all of that is designed to, again, protect their back, but not in itself trigger a media frenzy. They're trying to play it down the middle. They're like they've taken out the short club. They're just willing to hit a 4-iron down the middle, then take out the driver. They can't risk it. And so the way the game is unfolding is this. If the television media stand down, they may try to glide all the way to the White House and never have to actually directly speak to the Rockefeller Initiative. But if the media, particularly the TV media, bite down, they're ready to engage it. The moment Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, engages this issue at the level that it requires, which means she directly confronts the Rockefeller Initiative and gets into that history, keeping in mind that there's 25 living principles to that Rockefeller Initiative, and I have supplied the contact information to those 25 principles to several hundred journalists. All right? This thing blows out, and that will force Obama and the Pentagon to cut a deal, and Obama will disclose. That is what is happening right now, and it's on track to happen before the election in November the 9th.
Steve, why do you think it has taken the mainstream media so long to catch on to this? They were tipped off about it on February 13th, 2015, with the ominous tweet of John Podesta. But it's only been the last 4 to 5 weeks that people in the mainstream, whether it's the New York Post, whether it's MSNBC, or whoever the media outlet is, has finally figured out that we're talking about the biggest story next to Jesus Christ himself coming back down from the heavens to affect mankind. And yet, for over a year, they've dropped the ball.
Well, again, you have to view various parts of the media separately. The print media has come around. Now, admittedly, several hundred stories had been written before the New York Times finally jumped in. Okay, meaning that even though these stories are turning up everywhere, the New York Times did not deem it appropriate for them to engage until, I think, May the 16th. By the way, all of the media coverage that we're talking about here, everything we're talking about here, including the statements by Clinton and Podesta and everything else, all can be found on a single page. And that is, you go to paradigmresearchgroup.org, and on that very top page, click on unprecedented political media coverage. It's all you got to do. And then just scroll down, and you will be astounded at how much coverage is taking place. So if you're talking about the mainstream print, yeah, like the New York Times. The New York Times did not jump into this until, let's see, I'll find it just a second. Just a second. There it is. May the 10th. And the original coverage started back in November of 2014. The Times of London finally stepped in with a very small article on May the 13th, 3 days later. But nevertheless, they have come into the game. The Chicago Tribune didn't come in until just recently. But nevertheless, they're in play. And, of course, many, many scores of other print publications. So they have jumped in. It's the television news that have held off. Now, I did get 2 calls about 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, probably stemming from the June 2nd statements of Podesta at the Code Conference in Rancho Palo Verdes, in front of these very wealthy, high-tech people. I mean, really serious event. $6,500 a ticket. This is not a fundraiser. This is a conference. And he again answers a question about the ET issue and says it's serious and important, and Clinton's going to look into it. So I got a call from CNN. I got a call from ABC News. The CNN call was for me to give to be part of one of Jeannie Moses' little humor pieces, and I said no. The ABC News, though, I really wanted that segment. I was in London. I didn't get it in time. But those are the only 2 calls I have had from all of the cable and network news programs, and there are dozens of them, since the political initiative began November 2014, 19 months. And I point out, not as a matter of blowing my horn or anything, but of these hundreds and hundreds of articles about the political connection to the ET issue via the Clintons, well over 100 have referred to Paradigm Research Group and me. And I'm talking New York Times, New Republic. I'm talking the Washington Post, Mother Jones Magazine, New York Observer, all the papers in the UK, Daily Mirror, Daily Mail, Daily Express, etc. Over 100. And yet I didn't get a call from CNN until just about 2 weeks ago. Why? America gets its news from 2 places now, basically, from television and from the internet. Those that are getting it from the internet are more of the millennial generation. And the internet is a much more complicated forest to find your way through. The vast majority get it from television. The 3 networks are under the thumb of the government through the FCC. And the 3 cable networks, while not under the FCC, don't have any audience. One of the reasons they don't have any audience, they're terrible. All right? And I'm talking about the news cable. HBO, I worship at the feet of HBO. But in terms of the news, awful. And so because they don't have an audience, there is a whole bunch of things they will not do for fear to offend somebody. Right? And so even though you've got hosts that are making, and I've done the research, between $1 and $30 million a year, virtually every single host you see on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News are multimillionaires. Every single one of them. And some of them are making between $10 and $20 million a year. They have no motivation to rock the boat, no motivation to do anything but just collect their money. And then you got the network news. They don't have that much news anymore. They've shifted a lot of the programs to nothing more than crime shows. And I guess they're afraid the government could give them a hard time. In other words, the United States is being completely failed by the television news reality, or television news entities. And I mean failed in a colossal way. The list of things that they should have dealt with and didn't, issues they should have covered but didn't, things they should have got right but didn't, that have led America into wars, death, destruction, vast loss of resources, is a very long list. Every single one of these journalists has blood on their hands, intentional or otherwise. And of course, most of that goes right up to the editors and to the ultimate owners and publishers. They're failing us awful. It's like an entire group of medical clinics, right, serving millions of people that are getting all the diagnoses wrong. They're not even looking at certain diseases, and people are dying everywhere. It's exactly like that. And so until we fix that, until somehow we fix that, it's a major problem. But let's face it, they still are in the news business, and they still need ratings, and this is the biggest news story in history. And so I predict that very soon the network news, all, praise be upon them, with the networks and, of course, the cable news operations, will jump into this story with both feet, and that will be pretty much the ballgame. Once they enter, the print people will, of course, double up. I mean, once it goes there, they're all going to come back and redo all the stories all over again because they're going to get readership. And then the situation for the Clintons is intolerable. And they'll have to do something which is rather odd, but occasionally happens. They're going to have to speak serious truth to power. And what they will discover is when you tell the truth, people love you. I don't understand why American politicians don't get this, but they just don't. They lie and lie and lie, and people hate them. If they tell the truth, people like them, but they keep lying anyway. I don't understand it. Maybe someday someone will explain it to me.
But the media has not done what they are supposed to do. They are supposed to be the voice of the public, and yet they have become biased in their stories. They have become infotainment rather than journalists. It's very much a bone of contention with me because I went to journalism school. I got my degree, and I remember my instructors saying, you do not even take a golf game from someone if you play golf, because that is showing biasness. And the fact that no journalist in the United States wants to try and break the story of the biggest story of mankind currently, it's ridiculous to me, because when I was a journalist for 10 years, the goal was to beat the competition. Get that news story first. It was a passion. It was like heroin, a drug, Steve, where you wanted to get that story first, and yet nobody wants to touch this one.
Well, again, let's make sure we characterize it appropriately. All right. There are a number of journalists in the print realm that are going after this story. They are limited, obviously, to some degree by what their editors will allow, but I'm working with 25 that are green-lighted to write on this story, and they're going to write more. But to get back to your statement, let me put it another way, and that is, and I'm looking now for, I seem to have lost a particular file that I'm rather fond of. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Hang on. I'm coming up. Here it is. There we go. All right. Look, I'm working with 25 journalists. All right. Now, let me just give you the names of some journalists that have been going after this story. You've got A.J. Vicens of Mother Jones Magazine. He's written several articles. You've got Ben Terrace, did a reasonably good article at the Washington Post. Jennifer Harper has done a dozen or more articles on this at the Washington Times. Warren Rojas has done several articles at Roll Call, that one of the major newspapers is in every office on Capitol Hill. Damon Steer is the one that interviewed Hillary Clinton, got her to make those extraordinary comments on December the 30th of last year while she was up campaigning in New Hampshire. Jonathan Dillon over at the Daily Mail. Daniel Uberhaus did an excellent article from Vice. Billy Cox has been writing about this subject for 20 years at the Herald Tribune in Sarasota. John Austin at the Daily Express. Amy Chozick, of course, did the New York Times article. So the print journalists are trying to get into this. Can they just jump in completely? Not given the truth embargo is still roughly in place. No, but they are collectively driving this story now to where it will ultimately bust open. So in other words, the print people are pretty much doing their job. Now, sure, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, LA Times should all have assigned by now 4 or 5 journalists to dig as deep into the history of the ET issue, not the UFO issue. And this isn't about ufology. This is the extraterrestrial presence issue, and start doing major pieces. Again, there has been a truth embargo for 69 years, but that doesn't mean that they're not prepared to do it if the circumstances are right. And the circumstances are just about there. We have Clinton fully connected to the issue. She's already made a number of statements. She's the leading candidate to be president of the United States. There's still 4 months left in the campaign, or is it 5? July, August, September, October. Yeah, about 4.5 months. So that's in place. What's left is for the news, the television news people, to finally realize that they cannot stand down from this story. So now, but let me add this. Look, in a sense, we've created our own version of Soviet media here in the United States. The Soviet media, the television media, was completely controlled by the Communist Party. Absolutely completely controlled. Nothing was said on there without the Communist Party approval. And so huge numbers of things would be completely ignored. Whole aspects of the world would shut out. Lies were propagated. But of course, the public, the Soviet people knew this, but they'd watch it to get some bits of information. We've kind of created our own version of that, amazingly enough. I mean, I don't know who came up with that idea. Oh, let's create a Soviet media situation here. Let's create a media that spends huge amounts of money, but kind of just is a talking points thing for the press or a bunch of entertainment, bread and circus. I don't know who came up with that. That person should be banned to some remote part of the world and never allowed to do anything remotely journalistic again as long as they live. But that's what they did. However, unlike the Soviet era, we have something the Soviet people didn't have. We have the internet. We have YouTube. And we have billions of people already connected to that internet. And so while the television news is failing the American people, the internet is moving to fill the gaps with high-end, well-funded investigatory sites like Vice, like Intercept, like ProPublica, and others. As well as the fact that YouTube clips of this and that, which would never turn up on NBC, can be found by anybody in the world by simply going to the right place. Now, it's a hell of a lot harder to really get really good, solid understanding of what's going on the internet, or it's a lot harder to get to the information than basically sitting in your living room and then turning on the news. Boom, there it is. All right, so the trade-off is it's harder to get the good stuff on the net, but that's where the good stuff is. So we have that, and for that reason, the cable and the television news people have a dilemma. To the extent that they keep playing bread and circus with us and reading the government's talking points, they're going to continue to lose viewers. And they're going to shrink. As they move to cable entertainment like HBO and the internet for news, their whole news operations shrink to nothing. Basically, they're committing suicide. Now, at some point, they're going to go, why are we doing that? What are we going to get from this? I mean, it's not like the government's going to assassinate us. That's not going to happen here. It happens elsewhere, but not here. I mean, we're rich. We're making plenty of money, right? Who are we serving by refusing to cover these major news stories, particularly the ET issue? And at some point they go, really, nobody. Screw them.
Exactly.
And when they jump in, it's over.
Steve, I'm going to get you to hold on here. Steve, welcome back.
Good to be back, Dave.
Before we get to some questions from the audience here, let's talk about this weekend coming up. The Alien Cosmic Expo in Brantford, Ontario, home of Wayne Gretzky, if you want a little bit of history on that town. So hockey's royalty is from there, so you got to check that out when you're there. Anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Fine. Well, look, this is an important event. Right now, Victor Vigiani is arguably the leading exopolitical activist in Canada in terms of addressing the issue, trying to get it to the media, trying to get it to the political leadership and so forth. And he's come up with an amazing idea, working in concert with Joanne Eady, who is the promoter and the producer of this ACE conference, Alien Cosmic Expo in Brantford, about 20 minutes from Toronto. They've arranged to have a day that's devoted to disclosure issue. Now, if you go to Google it up, which all you have to do is just put in Alien Cosmic Expo, and comes right up, and you click on it, go to the main page. You can scroll down. You can see the schedule on Saturday in the morning. What we're going to do is we're going to have an event which is really, I don't have a name for it. The citizen hearing on disclosure was a mock congressional hearing. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. That's what it was. What Victor has set up is kind of a reverse or a press hearing. Again, not a press conference, but a press hearing. Now, what do I mean by that? You're going to have 6 or 7 journalists from 6 different journalistic venues, and there's some strong ones there. I mean, this is very representative of Canadian journalism, who pretty much like the former members of Congress that were on the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure Committee, a neutral on the fence, not leaning one way or the other too much on the ET issue, And they are going to question. They're going to be on the committee panel, in a sense, and then we're going to be sitting in front of them. There's about 9 of us, which includes Grant Cameron, Stanton Friedman, Nick Pope, Richard Dolan, Travis Walton, and former Defense Minister of Canada Paul Hellyer, and Victor Viggiani. They're going to grill us, I guess you could say, for 3 hours, and everything's on the table. A lot of journalists have been invited to watch this. So this is very similar to the citizen hearing in that a lot of information is going to come out in a sophisticated way under questioning from a non-biased panel, but in this case, it's journalists, not former journalists, but current journalists. The potential for this to develop huge interest in Canada is very great. So this is a brilliant move by Victor, and it's going to be a very interesting 3 hours. If you can get to Brantford, Canada, for this, certainly for the whole conference, Friday through Sunday, which is the 24th to 26th, I encourage people to come. Now, in the afternoon of that Saturday, Grant will be speaking actual presentation, Victor, and then that evening, Richard Dolan, Nick Pope, I speak on Sunday. So in addition to this 3-hour panel, we're also going to be addressing the issue in 1-hour presentations. This is a significant event. It's going to be broadcast like the citizen hearing was in high definition, and that's going to be made available worldwide. So this is just another example of the fact that the truth embargo is basically run out of time. We're able to come at it from too many directions. We're getting more and more media involved. And while some are going to hang out until the last dog dies, a lot of people are going to realize it's time to step into this and get in front of the parade. So it's just, again, my only concern, and I've said this repeatedly, I have no doubt that the truth embargo's days are almost over and disclosure is close. My one concern is that we are at risk every day of another major terrorist event. The kinds of things that are happening in Orlando and San Bernardino are trivial. I'm talking something much bigger than that, bigger even than 9/11. If we have an event like that, disclosure is going to be almost impossible to press for in the media and in the political class. What will be happening after that will be lots and lots more war. And so that's why I'm trying to get as much support behind this advocacy movement now as possible. The funds are still needed to get back to Washington so I can be available to the media. I cannot stay there now. I'm out of funds. So because of this potential attack, I mean, if there wasn't for the potential for a terrorist event that could throw us into 10 more years of war, even worse than we've seen so far, then I would say, let's keep working at it. Disclosure is inevitable. But it's not. And so that's the equation that we're dealing with. So those that are sitting back going, it'll happen, are making a big mistake. All right? I hope that Canada is getting a better picture of the international situation than the American people are, because the international situation is grave. There are millions of people out there ready to act. They are angry, and they hate the United States. And they are capable of taking action. And the United States is vulnerable. And the United States is powerful. And a lot of these people want the United States to take the most draconian action possible. This is a worst case scenario. Not to mention the fact the U.S. is still basically, its entire economy is based on trillions and trillions of debt and zero interest rates on the Fed, and it's kind of an illusion. Could collapse at any time. And our whole political system is falling apart. And so people are thinking, it's all good, it's all good. Wrong. And I'm saying, one Canadian gave PRG the money to do the citizen hearing on disclosure. And he's made history. But it was Canadian, not an American, that put up that very large amount of money. I don't need that anymore. $50,000, I can close this out. I can't find that person. I can't find one more Canadian to follow in the steps of the gentleman that funded the citizen hearing on disclosure. And the mistake that Canada is making is that if the U.S. goes down, Canada is chained to it with a titanium anchor. It goes down with us. And so I'm hoping Canada will help. We need Canada's help right now. You got a great society up there. It's all good. We need a little help down here so we don't sink and take you with us.
What is Canada's role in disclosure, Steve? I mean, we hear, when I had Victor on this show back on June 2nd, he was saying that Canada could actually play a very large role. Now, many of our American listeners may roll their eyes at that or give a snarky little laugh, but even myself, as being Canadian, would think that as well, because I don't really know what we could do. Why is it so important to get Canada on the bandwagon for this? I know you just mentioned the economical ties, but where on the defense, where on the world stage would Canada have a role in disclosure?
Oh, it's easy. Look, and I'll be talking about this obviously on the weekend, right, in Brantford. But when the ET situation escalated in early '47, a lot of countries knew about it, and probably even knew about it prior to '47. And obviously, this was a big issue for them, but it was well contained. And I'm quite sure Canada was aware of this activity, as was the United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, all of the key English-speaking allies to the United States during the war. But that containment was shattered by the Roswell events of July '47. The whole thing nearly got out into the public domain. I mean, it came very close, within hours, perhaps, of becoming irreversible. But Truman jumped on it quickly. They reversed their announcement and put the toothpaste back in the tube. But they were given a shock to the system. And so for the next few years, the government, U.S. government, was, I think, working to develop the basis to contain the issue. And they had a pretty clear field. There wasn't any pressure on them. And so during that period, for the next 5 years or so, I'm pretty sure that Canada was approached, Australia, New Zealand, and of course the UK were approached, and other nations, but certainly those, possibly at the executive level, almost certainly at the intelligence level, no paper trail, to reach understandings that, like, look, this has got to stay contained. You need to stick with us on this. Let us make the call. And Canada agreed. And everything was fine until '52. And then things changed in a big way, because in '52, in July, is when there was a big flap over the Washington, D.C. itself. Several days. These craft were all over the place. And that really shook up the United States. At which point, I think they doubled down. They held a CIA conference to sort of try to decide what to do. And what they did was to go full bore on the truth embargo, institutionalize it, and say, look, this is number one national security. You don't talk about this. This is going to be embargoed. And they got Canada, obviously, to fully agree to that. And Canada has been part of this embargo from the beginning. Same thing with the UK, same thing with Australia, and virtually all of our allies. And so, first and foremost, what you have to understand is Canada has been backing the truth embargo for the last 69 years. Now, Canada has not always followed the U.S. down the path that the U.S. wants to go. Canada has a pretty good history of staying out of most of the ridiculous conflicts. They basically, instead of Vietnam, they would not participate in the Second Iraq War. They did participate in the Afghanistan issue. But in other areas, they've also deviated. They've deviated in how they handle their banking system. So they're not completely handcuffed to the U.S. They've also developed a strong reputation as peacemakers, supporting peace initiatives and peacekeeping operations. They are well liked around the world. The U.S. is hated around the world. I recall conversations years ago where people were about to go overseas, and they were telling me how they would go into these luggage stores and acquire Canadian stickers and put the Canadian stickers on their luggage, so that as they're cruising around, people will think they're Canadian and not American. So How can Canada make a difference? It's real simple. Canada can decide, just as it did with the Second Iraq War, that it's not going to support the truth embargo anymore, and they're going to speak to it at the political level and also at the journalistic level. And that could change things very quickly.
Steve, I want to get to some questions from our audience. This one comes from Eric in the SOR Space Travelers chat room on Facebook. Steve, have you read the Patriot Act, and is there anything in that document related to disclosure and secrecy?
I have not read the Patriot Act. I know about it from what's been reported. There's no question that the Patriot Act covers and impacts in terms of revealing classified information and so forth. It also makes it easier for the government to get at our information. But I'm not aware that there's anything in there that is targeting the ET issue per se. The truth embargo was well in place before the Patriot Act came along. Clearly, the terrorist game that's being played between America and those that hate America makes it easier for the national security state to keep a tight leash on what it has, what the information it has, and gain greater access to what the public knows. And that's not helping. And they've abused that power. But thanks to the internet, they've been caught. And so there's a very complex chess game being played between the national security state, mainstream journalism, alternative journalism, and the world of internet hacking and internet, I guess you could say, exposure. Anonymous, WikiLeaks, and so forth. It's a very complicated game. But it's not the way things used to be. It's very hard to fully understand the scope of it. There are a limited number of books that have tried to get the handle on it all. But let's just say that the people are winning some. We're winning some. The NSA is losing some. The Patriot Act has been revised. It's been looked at. But we're always one terrorist attack away from even more draconian measures. We are in a box. We are in a situation that fundamentally is unresolvable. And by that, I mean primarily the United States, and by extension its allies, but primarily the United States. And the outcome, the ultimate outcome of this is going to be very bad. I mean, it's kind of like, you know somebody that's doing heavy drugs for about 10 years, and it's getting worse, and you kind of know where it's all going. It's almost like it can't be reversed. That's kind of where the U.S. is right now. There's only one way out of this mess that we're in. And that is disclosure. A disclosure is a ladder big enough that we can climb out of the hole that we've dug for ourselves as a nation since 1964. And that is one of the reasons why disclosure is absolutely essential and necessary. It is a game-changing, worldview-changing shift of such power that it makes it possible to reassess, re-examine, change course across a broad spectrum of issues and policies. Whereas right now, we're just locked in. We can't get anything done in the United States. As we're speaking right now, a bunch of Democrats are camping out in the United States House of Representatives like kids used to take over the offices of the head of universities, back in the anti-war days, in order to get their point across that they wanted to stop the war. These members of Congress, and they're in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they're bringing in betting, and they're saying they're going to camp out because the Republicans will not pass any bill addressing the issue of guns. In this case, it's a matter of guns and the ability of terrorism or people on the watch list, fly watch list, and so forth. But I mean, this is not the kind of adult government that you want. And this breakdown in our policies, our politics, is happening across the board. It's really disassembling before our eyes. And people say, well, there are plenty of countries that have screwed up politics. I agree. But do those countries control 47% of all the nuclear weapons in the world? I don't think so.
Do they have carriers in the South China Sea? I don't think so. Do they have destroyers running up along the international borders of the Black Sea of the UK? I don't think so. And so, again, we are in a very grave situation. And disclosure is one way to change course. And those who support war, violence, destruction, and all the profits you can make from war, by and large, will oppose disclosure because they could see it bringing an end to that little game that they've been playing, and they don't want to give up that money and that influence.
Let's go back to the chat rooms here. We have a couple people asking in both chat rooms, so I'll ask it together. What is stopping other countries right now, in your opinion, especially those who might oppose us, in the United States, that is, from calling the United States out with their own proof?
It's a critical question. One of the top 5 exopolitical questions. Again, our allies are standing down because they're our allies. And we're number one. We were a critical factor, along with the Soviet Union, to be truthful, but in defeating the Axis powers. We were the only power that made powerful enough to, quote, oppose Soviet Union. So we're owed. Plus, we have great financial power. And so in terms of our allies, they're going along with their leader. However, it's also worth noting that the United States is not just powerful, but dangerous. I mean, we are the only nation that's ever dropped nuclear bombs on humans, but to be fair, there was a powerful justification for that in 1945. I get that. What a lot of people may not know, and if you don't believe me, look it up, is that, forget the Korean War, let's go past the Korean War, from 55 on to the present, the United States has bombed more nations in 35 bombing campaigns than all of the rest of the nations in the world combined. And so the idea that you piss us off, we'll just shrug our shoulders, or we're not capable of getting nasty. We've also assassinated heads of state, overthrown governments, undermined economies. We can be really nasty. And so just because you're an ally doesn't mean that, well, if you decide to preempt us on the ET issue, that we'll just let it go. No. Now, as far as our enemies, that's more interesting. The United States has 2 fundamental opposing social contracts: China and Russia, and before that, the Soviet Union. Those are the fundamental opposing social contracts. Now, we weren't satisfied with that, and so we decided to launch massive military interventions throughout the Middle East and create huge amount of hatred and enemies there. But it's that, and which could cause havoc here. I mean, there's no question. But that is a mess there. I mean, I don't call that a social contract. I call that basically a bee's nest. I mean, we've been going around smacking the biggest bee's nest, hornet's nest in the world with a baseball bat for about 10 years. But in terms of major powers and social contracts, there's 2. One is China and one is Russia. Now, China is an ideological control state, evolving to be sure, but particularly as you go back in time, it's a greater and greater and greater ideological control state, in which complete fealty to the state and its agenda and its philosophy is mandatory at the penalty of severe consequences. Soviet Union, of course. Russia obviously is not the Soviet Union, and it's not communist, but it is still it is the stepson of the USSR. There's still a lot of ideological control aspects to it. And so why is this important? If you have an ideological control state, the last thing you want to do is tell your people that the galaxy is filled with civilizations more advanced than us. They've been here before. They're here now. And who knows what the future brings. You don't want to do that, because that is not going to encourage people to literally maintain complete allegiance and fealty to your ideology or your iconic leaders. No, that's the last thing you want. And so they have stood down for their own reasons, right? And you put it all together, and the truth embargo is now in its 69th year.
On that note, Steve, we are going to take our break here at the top of the hour. Steve, welcome back to the show.
Yes, indeed.
I have an interesting question from Jay in the Spaced Out Radio chat room on Spreaker, and I think this is actually quite an important question as well. Steve, what is your level of concern with people's negative response to disclosure with things like the new movie Independence Day about to come out?
I'm actually not too concerned. The entertainment industry has played an interesting role in all of this. Exactly how much connection there is between entertainment decisions on this issue and government or the intelligence operation, we don't know. We know that that many movies, have cooperation from the Department of Defense, Air Force, Navy, what have you, because they have planes and boats and trains and stuff that are involved. And there have been some occasions where the government has, in fact, sort of said, "Look, we'll help you out, but you got to change something." Interesting enough, one of those instances was the first Independence Day. That movie was a big deal, and if you recall, it comes out on July the 4th, and it's basically a hyper-patriot movie, is what it is, and it's highlighting the Air Force and our military and what have you. And so the Department of Defense agreed to be very helpful. And there's a lot of ways that they can help with a movie like that. It helps keep the cost down and so forth. But when the Department of Defense learned that they were going to be having references to Area 51 and the fact that a Roswell vehicle was kept there, which may or not have happened, that vehicle, we don't know where exactly that. We think we know where that vehicle went, but no one knows for sure. But in any event, when they said no, you can't have that in the movie, in which case the movie separated from any assistance by the U.S. government. But in any event, not surprisingly, here's the good news. The good news is that the entertainment industry has made more money and produced more films and television about this particular genre than any other genre. In other words, the extraterrestrial-related genre has generated between $75 and $100 billion in revenues, TV and film, going back to 1951. 30 movies. The top-grossing movie of all time is about blue extraterrestrials. There's 3 sequels to that movie in production simultaneously right now in New Zealand and what have you. The effect of this is to raise the awareness, the concept, or awareness of the concept of, quote, extraterrestrials to virtually 100% worldwide. You got to go in the deepest parts of the jungles of Borneo to find somebody that doesn't know what an extraterrestrial is, right? Or even to some degree what a, quote, UFO is. So that awareness is hugely important. There's nothing surprising about the idea of extraterrestrials to almost anybody. Now, the bad news is that when it comes to movies, violence and conflict is where the action is. And so these movies are heavily oriented towards conflict between extraterrestrials and human beings. And they've portrayed that conflict in all manner of ways. And so that could create a problem given that there really are extraterrestrials. But again, so much work has been done by the extraterrestrial phenomena research organizations and people in terms of the real issue that the public sort of knows that the fictional stuff is one thing and the reality is another. And there's a perfect analogy for this. In the early days of film, the 50s, 40s, 50s, you had a huge interest in westerns. Westerns was the number one genre, frankly, back at that period. And it was cowboys and Indians, and it was all about conflict. There was very little movies about the intricacies of Indian life and Indian culture and how it helped white people see new ways of looking at things. No, It was violence between white people and Indians. The Indians were always the bad guys. The Indians almost always lost. They were portrayed in all manners of ways, incredibly vicious. And guess what? Over time, people got fed up with that and began to learn more and more about the true history of Native Americans. And that kind of movie became basically not sellable. And it virtually disappeared. Right? You don't see it. Okay, now, so you have that as an example of the fact the public can make distinctions, and I think they're making them here. So I'm not saying that a few people won't go nuts if the ET presence is announced on Monday. But trust me, there's people going nuts every single day about anything. I mean, there's always something. And so the fact that some people, this might be, a breaking point for them is absolutely no reason whatsoever to maintain the truth embargo for one more minute. My God, if people getting a little upset was the basis upon which we decide what we're going to do or not do and what we're going to talk about and not talk about, we wouldn't do anything and we wouldn't talk about anything. But the truth embargo benefits from propaganda, which I think the government has helped to put out, that religion collapses, economy collapses, people go crazy, rip off their clothes, run naked through the streets, all that. It serves the truth embargo. I'm not buying it, and fewer and fewer people are buying it. I am much more worried about what's going to happen to this world and to America and the United States if we don't have disclosure compared to having disclosure by a substantial margin.
Eric in the SOR Space Travelers Room wants to know, Steve, where does the UN fit into the disclosure agenda?
The UN would love to get into this, believe me. They would love to get into this. It would seem to be exactly the kind of thing they were designed for, right? Represent the human race, all countries. But they can't. And it must be frustrating for them. The reason they can is complex, but to put it as simply as possible, the UN, whatever the initial intentions were for it, which I think were noble, by dint of history, essentially became a functional part of the mutual assured destruction reality that has followed us down history since virtually 1945. In other words, you had a standoff between the Soviet Union and the United States. Nuclear weapons were being built by the thousands. And so the UN was then sort of basically made a tool of that situation. The nature of the Security Council, the various rules and so forth, were designed so the UN could be a buffer between the U.S., the United States, USSR, and China. To help prevent somebody from launching a nuclear war. It was not much about, quote, how can the nations come together to solve problems and find peaceful ways to do stuff. No. When the Cold War ends, and even before the Cold War ended, the disdain for the UN was huge. The America was denying funding. It slowly decayed. The building is a mess. It's essentially just been allowed to decay and is not a significant factor anymore. Right or wrong, that's the way it is. And so there is no way that the U.S. government is going to allow the UN to take front and center on this, or any other nation for that matter. Post-disclosure, the UN will almost certainly try to reassert itself as a logical venue. I have a hunch that what will happen is that they will close it post-disclosure, and we will create a brand new international organization to operate on hopefully the higher side of the original mission. That would be my guess. Now, that maybe they just reform the United Nations and put it in that position. It's a hard call. But unfortunately, the UN is not going to have an opportunity to be involved in this. It's just not going to be allowed. And that's the way it is.
There's been so many countries that have already disclosed what they know that doesn't affect their national security. When you have a number of countries that have already done that, looking at the UN or looking at any other group that's out there, disclosure in reality has technically happened. But yet, because it hasn't happened in the big four, being the US, Great Britain, Russia, China, it seems like we're still trying to, run over this path of making it happen. What's the difference between the disclosure of countries who have already come out compared to the big four?
Well, I'm going to have to bring you up to speed here, Dave. First of all, let's be clear. The disclosure advocacy movement is about the formal acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence. It's a capital D. It's an event. When the words come out of the head of state of a nation that we are not alone in the universe or in the galaxy, and we are being visited right now, or whatever version of that, maybe accompanied by some nice government-held evidence that goes along with the massive amount of evidence in the public domain, that is disclosure. Nothing else is capital D disclosure. Now, secondly, no head of state of any nation has ever said that. There has not been disclosure. Third, no nation is disclosed, as I've stated. What some nations have done is they have released more files than the U.S., which is to say, without being pressured, many nations have released files to the public domain that they were holding for reasons which are not clear. I think in many cases it was their way of showing the U.S. that they're a little bit peeved at the fact that we're still standing still on this issue and we're still embargoing it. Just like there were a lot of nations upset with the U.S. because they kept the Cuba embargo going for 20-some years, probably beyond when it should have ended. So I think that was one way. It also took some pressure off them, meaning we're trying to be helpful. But did these nations disclose all that they know? Absolutely not. Almost all the nations that have dumped records into the public domain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Argentina, Uruguay, Norway, Sweden, UK, France, all of them have air forces. All of them have gun camera footage of chase incidents. They have plenty of other stuff. But they're not putting that out because if they did, that would possibly trigger disclosure and force it out. And again, that would preempt the United States. And so that's where things are at. There has not been disclosure. There has been some small d disclosure, and a number of nations are doing that, though it's kind of settled down right now, and that's helpful. It's put pressure on the U.S. without question. We've used it. Obviously, it's heightened the awareness of people. But if I'm a nation, and I don't want to upset the United States by finally confirming the ET presence, but I put out a bunch of files, and my people, the people of my nation, read those files, and they get a prize of it. That means that when disclosure comes, they're going to be a little less shocked. So it's a reasonable thing to do. It's a nice middle position. That's what's going on. Now, could the Prime Minister of Canada disclose the ET presence tomorrow? Good. Has he been briefed by the military of Canada? No. Should he? Yes. Will I be talking about that in Brantford? Yes. Okay. So there are a good probably 6 to 10 heads of state in the world that could disclose the ET presence tomorrow if they wanted to. And unless the United States threaten them all with complete nuclear annihilation, the U.S. needs to consider that possibility. Something I remind our fine president of every chance I get. We're not the only nation, and disclosure could come from another direction. And if it does, if another nation makes the announcement before we do, it's going to be costly. There's going to be a heavy geopolitical cost to the U.S. Not that the U.S. hasn't been screwing up on a regular basis and undermining its geopolitical position. God knows that's practically our job now, is what can we do tomorrow to make things worse for the U.S. in the world? So not disclosing first, why not? What can I say? I'm a disclosure advocate. Be assured if Trudeau were to disclose tomorrow, he would have my complete and 100% support, and I would not regret it for 1 second, regardless of the geopolitical cost to the U.S. The U.S. has had...
And I think we just Had a little bit of a Skype problem there, everything breaking up. We're going to try and get Steve Basset back right now on the show because he is going pretty good on this in regards to countries coming out about the disclosure. We're going to get Steve right back on the show here momentarily. Good to have you back, Steve. So I was just kind of filling in the blanks. You were going on about, it doesn't matter which country comes out with disclosure, but if it's not the U.S., there might be a little bit of egg on the president's face because of that.
A lot of egg. The geopolitical consequences of the U.S. will be huge. We represent 5% of the population of the world, right? And we have led this embargo for 69 years. Now, admittedly, the Soviet Union also went along with this. They've got some egg, China, and so forth. They don't care. But certainly in what we'll call I guess you could say the democratic industrial nations, the U.S. led this embargo. It lied. It lied and lied and lied for 69 years for, quote, national security reasons. Now, if another nation makes the announcement, that nation gets the glory, gets the truth moniker, gets the historical vast legacy that will accompany it. The U.S. gets nothing except all of the negative downside of having led this lie for all these years. It gets all the negatives, it gets no positives. And that is going to lower our esteem. It's going to lower our geopolitical cred, which is already very low. And so the consequences for the U.S. are great. And I don't know if the people in the White House get this or not, but they had better wake up. That's all I can say.
Let's go to a question from the SOR Space Travelers from Gail here. Gail is asking, why will it cost the United States geopolitically if we don't disclose first? And what will that cost be?
Well, that's what I was saying. Our credibility will go down even further. We will not get the legacy of being the disclosure nation, the disclosure head of state. We lose all that. It goes to another nation. Russia certainly would gain enormously by making the announcement. This is one of the great truths ever revealed. I say revealed. It's one of the great truths ever acknowledged in all of human history. So I assure you that whatever head of state makes the announcement first, that head of state's going to have statues all around the world, and they're going to be talking about that person for 1,000 years. All right? And the U.S. is going to be, we wanted to tell you, we really meant to, but, it's just so hard to get things done in the U.S. now. Hell, we can't even fix a bridge down here. I mean, this is not good.
What about someone rogue like Putin? He beats to his own drummer. He really doesn't care what the rest of the world says in regards to, what happens in Russia. And yet he hasn't fully come out on disclosure either. What would be holding him back?
Good question. Now, look, if I had 5 minutes with Vladimir Putin, that's exactly what I would ask him. I would say, Mr. President Putin, why haven't you disclosed? I would love to know. I'm sure he has his reasons. I'm sure as Xi Jinping has his reasons. Though I'm less surprised about Xi Jinping. I used to think that he was an enlightened progressive leader. It turns out he's not. He's actually taking China backwards into a greater ideological control status. So in that sense, I get it. I could see why Xi Jinping has not done it. Putin, on the other hand, he's got the huge approval rating. It would elevate him even more. I don't know. All I can say is that's one of the great questions to be answered post-disclosure. On the other hand, he still could do it. He could do it tomorrow. He could do it any time he wants to. Look, the President Obama, President Clinton, even George W. Bush, and I can assure you President Hillary Clinton, was not briefed on this issue. Couldn't look inside the underground facilities if they wanted to. They're not on a need-to-know basis, which is completely illegal. It's treason, right? But they're shut out. This issue has been taken over by the military intelligence community as a national security matter. They don't trust politicians. Who can blame them, right? But that's just part of the dysfunction that's going on down here. So they've got nothing. So if they want, they can disclose to the American people, but they're basically going to have to hold up some of Stan Friedman's books and say, trust me, it's true. Read Stan Friedman. on the other hand, Putin, I can assure you there's not a member of the military or intelligence in Russia that is even going to remotely consider telling Vladimir Putin, you know, Vlad, you really don't have a need to know on this one, so don't call us. I don't think so. And so if I'm one of those apparatchiks running around the White House trying to make sure the Obama administration has a great legacy, or if I'm in the Pentagon, you know, trying to make sure that everything works out well for the United States, and I think that somehow Vladimir Putin is just going to keep sitting on this issue because, well, he doesn't want to offend the U.S., boy, you need a smack upside the head because he can announce at any time. Time is running out for the United States to do the right thing. I can say this over and over and over again. And if it wasn't for the lack of major support from the American people that are still mesmerized by the truth embargo, intimidated by it, this would have already happened. But there is a truth embargo. It's part of the deal. We have to overcome it. Every major activist movement in history has always had this kind of barrier to overcome. And so, you know, I try not to complain too much and focus most on getting the job done.
We're going to hop out for a break here at the bottom of the hour. Steve, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us.
Mm-hmm.
A comment was made in the SOR Space Travelers. What about a group like Anonymous? They can seem to hack into everything. Whether it's government computers, they're destroying ISIS on the social media war online. Why haven't they come out with any UFO files if this story is so big?
It's a reasonable question. Look, there are, there is competition amongst nations, and amongst, I guess you could say, the geek world, right? Geek nation, to achieve higher and higher hacking skills. And some of the finest minds in Korea, North Korea, and China are recruited and brought in. They have access to the absolute top technology. And the idea is to be able to hack anything and everything. No question about it. Have they come across ET stuff? It's possible. Would they use it? Not necessarily. Remember, China knows there's an extraterrestrial presence. So if Chinese hacking squad discovers evidence within our deep files, classified files, confirming an ET presence, that's not a shock. They already know that. Now, so in terms of other countries, it's an easy explanation. If you're talking about Anonymous, or in general what we'll call non-state operating hackers, if they came across, of course, there's this example of Gary McKinnon, which is really a very low-end example, very basic example. But if they came across some heavy-duty material, that would be interesting. But I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. One, that the ET material is about as protected as anything in the government. Meaning, one way you ultimately protect it is you disconnect it from the internet. It doesn't have access to the internet. I think this stuff is about as protected in every way possible as anything we've got. Secondly, I don't necessarily think that the geek nation, the independent operators, necessarily have the technology and or the skills at the level of the state operators like China and so forth in Russia. And they may not be able to get to it. Would I be shocked, however, if suddenly WikiLeaks dumped a huge cache of AT-related files right out of the CIA and or DIA? No. Would that have huge impact on the disclosure process? Yes. And that's just one more reason why, if I'm the President of the United States, or if I'm, key people in the Pentagon, including, of course, Secretary of Defense, I'd be thinking about getting disclosure done as soon as possible. Just saying.
Joe has a question in the Space Out Radio's SOR Space Travelers on Facebook, and he is asking, there are a million theories, Steve, on what the ET presence is. It's probably something we haven't even thought of. What do you think the ETs actually are, Steve?
They're beings from other planets. It's real simple. They're beings from other planets. And we know a lot about them because hundreds of thousands, probably as many as 1 million contactees have submitted accounts to researchers describing their experiences. Many of these people have gone public. A fraction of these people have gone public. Many have been researched, examined. Stories have been written up in books and what have you. It's huge, a mass of evidence in which these beings are described in detail. In fact, some of these contactees are artists. They draw them. So we know what they look like. We have a lot of knowledge about what they're doing with contactees, but it's still a pretty incomplete picture. And so people then try to fill in the rest in terms of the agenda and so forth and so forth. Some people claim direct channel with them, and they're being told vast stories about what's going on. I can't depend on that. But we know a decent amount. And the contactees, who, of course, are not legitimate as far as mainstream society, though that will change. In fact, after disclosure, I mean, if you don't know a contactee, you're nobody, right? And everybody will want to be their friend. So we have an idea. They're doing exactly what we will do or would do if we don't blow ourselves up and develop interstellar travel. They have been engaging, watching, looking at, maybe studying planets, life planets, including sentient life planets, forever. And we're one of those planets. And some of these groups are interested in us. Some, probably millions, aren't. And one day we'll probably be part of some sort of larger alliance because they seem to have their own alliance amongst themselves. There's more than one type here, and they're working together, and so therefore there's an alliance. All of this is pretty logical, pretty straightforward. Absent the government's truth embargo, we would have a much better idea. The truth embargo has created a vacuum that's been filled with 1 million theories. And that's fine. They love that. The more crazy theory, or the more theories that we're running around chasing, the less pressure on the government. And so I understand that. But the work of a lot of people over 60 years has narrowed down this understanding fairly well. And unless you have an agenda opposed to the disclosure itself, more and more people are figuring out the basics.
Do you think disclosure will save a lot of lives? And I'm talking about the people who for years have been having real negative extraterrestrial experiences. You've heard the nightmares. Our listeners have heard the nightmares that some people are having. Do you think that ends with disclosure?
Well, first of all, I don't think... all right, I don't think that lives are the issue. In other words, I think they've damaged some lives without question. And one of the reasons is because obviously the government doesn't acknowledge it. Therefore, the people are closeted. They can't get help. So they're shuttered. And that makes it worse. But still, even regardless, it's traumatic for a lot of people. Do I think coerced or non-consensual contact will end with disclosure? I think there's a fair chance, 50-50. That would be interesting. Do I think disclosure will save lives? Oh, you betcha. I think disclosure could save billions of lives. And for those out there that are going, why should I care and why should I support the field? How about billions of lives? Now, some people say, hey, look, we need to lose those people. We're too crowded. Well, that's true. We are too crowded. We got too many people. There's no question. But if these people die badly because of grotesque policies and huge mistakes, their relatives are going to be very unhappy. And so you lose a couple of billion people, you got 4 billion, 5, 6 billion relatives really angry. And that is not going to make the world a fun place to be in. So yeah, billions of lives are at stake. Because one, we desperately need the ET technology and everything they've learned from it to apply for peaceful reasons to the huge problems we face as an overcrowded planet. We desperately need to change and move away from war as a fundamental policy of politics. We need to start redirecting our resources. We need a massive worldview change. And if we don't have these things, billions of people are going to die. Look, every single day, 25,000 children die under the age of 16 because there's not enough water, food, not enough hygiene, lack of medicine, in just poor conditions, 25,000 a day. People say that's not true. Look it up. It's damn well true. And maybe 20,000 one day, 28 the next, whatever. That's a lot of unhappy relatives. And who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the rich nations, the industrial nations, right, who spend trillions on building battleships. You know, the UK is in the process right now of building 2 massive aircraft carriers, which are going to cost about $9 billion. I was just in London. Not that you can't find it out on the internet, but I was in London. I saw it. And when I read the article, it was kind of funny because they went out of their way to point out that these 2 aircraft carriers, which are huge, are still a few feet shorter in length than the U.S.'s major carrier, which I think is the, whatever the hell it is, Ronald Reagan, the Enterprise, whatever. And I'm thinking, you know, I think most of you are getting what I'm getting at. I think you know what I'm talking about here. Bigger, longer, better. It was almost like there's no question the UK could have made those carriers a little bit longer so that they were the biggest carriers in the world, even if it was only 10 feet. But then that would have upstaged the United States, right? You know, speak softly, carry a big stick. So my question was, isn't this so transparently male? And 2, what in the hell does the UK need with 2 giant aircraft carriers, right, for $9 billion? So let me repeat. If we don't get disclosure soon, it's going to cost billions of lives. For those of you out there who are trying to decide, should I support this advocacy movement or not? Enough said.
You were quoted by MSNBC a couple of weeks ago stating that you strongly believe that Barack Obama will ruin John Podesta and Hillary's disclosure party by coming out with disclosure himself. Why do you believe before the end of his term Barack Obama will disclose?
Well, it's all tied together. Don't think of it as ruining the party, all right? The Democrats want to be the disclosure party, and Secretary Clinton wants to be the disclosure president. But history is caught up with them, all right? And so, and a Paradigm Research Group will take some credit for that. You know, I've been pounding on this issue for 20 years, all right, based in Washington. Until recently, I had to leave, ran out of money, whatever. Point is that history's caught up with them. So they are working with that. Now, Podesta originally calls to release the files in 2002, then 2003. Bill Richardson jumps in 2004. Hillary thought she was going to win the presidency in 2008. She didn't win it. Obama wins it. That means 8 more years. And the truth embargo was shaky, pretty shaky even in 2008. And so what happens? Well, first of all, Obama makes Podesta his campaign transition chairman, a major position. Helps select the government. Who do they bring in as Secretary of State? Hillary Clinton. Obviously, she was involved in the Rockefeller Initiative. Who do they make Secretary of Defense? By Leon Panetta, of course. He was the chief of staff during the Rockefeller Initiative. They tried to make Bill Richardson, who was a close friend of the Clintons and Secretary of Energy during the Clinton administration, President Clinton's administration, Secretary of Commerce. Didn't work out, but they tried. They literally brought the Rockefeller Initiative into the Obama White House. And then disclosure didn't take place. A lot of crazy, wild things happened. But then, as the history is really starting to catch up with the Clintons, and remember, the citizen hearing, which is a major event, citizenhearing.org, check it out. Go get the videos, high definition. Watch the whole 30 hours. It'll blow your mind. Not long after the citizen hearing on disclosure was completed at the National Press Club, Paradigm Research Group produced this with some fine Canadian money. Back when Canadian dollars were worth a lot more than they are now. Obama, out of nowhere, brings John Podesta into the White House as an advisor, ostensibly to talk about this issue. That nobody understood it. The press, why John Podesta had to step down as CEO of the Center for American Progress, which he founded. Pretty cushy job. Not a cushy job. It's an important job. Great job. He steps down, gives up that job, and goes in to be an advisor to the president for something like, 12 months, 13 months. Now, interestingly enough, as an advisor to the president, he can now speak with the president at length about anything in complete privacy. Got presidential protection. Without that, if he's not an advisor to the White House, if he's not working for the White House, he wants to talk to the president. He's got to check in. His name goes on a list, right? Then he's got to leave. He can be asked questions by the press. So he's an advisor for 13 months. And then on the day he leaves that job as advisor to President Obama to take over the campaign as chairman, not the manager, but the chairman, meaning the intellectual, kind of controlling intellectual of the campaign, he puts out the famous tweet, "My biggest regret, 2014, once again not getting #disclosure of the UFO files." What does all this say? It says that Obama has already been brought into the picture. They're all together. And so either Obama is going to be the disclosure president, or Secretary Clinton, if she wins the White House, is going to be the disclosure president. They got him covered both ways. Now, right now, it doesn't look good for Secretary Clinton. I got 25 reporters on board already. I could have 30 within another 3 or 4 weeks. They've written dozens of articles. Worldwide, there's been hundreds of articles. The Rockefeller Initiative is getting spread all over. And by the way, we're in a new era now. There was a time when the New York Times published an article, and if you lived in San Francisco, the only way you saw that article is if you were subscribing to it, and they sent it to you in the mail for a lot of money. Now, you could be some podunk paper in Minnesota. If you got a website, theoretically, every person on the internet in the world can come and read your paper. More than that, and of course this is where people are getting their news, when you go online to read an article, unlike the print, that article is filled with links to this site, that site, these documents, that web page. And so the document is like, the article is 3-4 times more powerful than a print article. And these things are pouring out. And so, here's how it goes. The Clintons will probably have to address the issue before the election. Once they do, the media goes bonkers, right? And they're going to start asking questions of Hillary Clinton and President Clinton and John Podesta and Bill Richardson and Leon Panetta and Mac McClarty. And by the way, George Stephanopoulos, who was a key advisor to Clinton while the Rockefeller Initiative was going on. By the way, I'm going to add him to the principals list here soon. And a bunch of other people. And then they're going to turn their attention on the Pentagon. And they're going to head over en masse, and they're going to have a few thousand questions for the Pentagon, and the Pentagon does not want to have to answer those questions. And so there is only one way out of that dilemma, and that is the Pentagon and the president finally get together and cut the deal necessary for the president to disclose. So Obama gets to be the disclosure president. He's a Democrat, so the Democratic Party gets to be the disclosure party. Secretary Clinton and President Clinton are well connected to the issue now, and so they get grandfathered in as major players, get a lot of legacy from that. She gets the White House and gets to be the first full-term disclosure president, who will most certainly have the most impact on the post-disclosure world of anybody in the United States. It's win, 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 win. Unless
Donald Trump gets in. What about Donald Trump?
If Donald Trump gets in, we got a whole different ball game. I can't see past that. In other words, if Donald Trump were to win the election November the 8th, 9th, whatever it is, I can't see past that. So I'll just have to demur on that. I don't know. We'll see. But until that happens, the scenario that I'm painting is pretty much what's going down. And the reason I know that is I'm in the middle of it, right in the middle of it. right there. I'm working with the journalists. I'm getting the feedback. I know the journalists that are trying to contact them, not getting responses. I'm on top of everything the Clintons have done. And if you go to that page, you go to paradigmresearchgroup.org, and you click on that link on that page, which says unprecedented political media coverage, you can go see it all. It's all there. And it'll take you days to follow it all. And it's not everything. It's only a decent sampling of the articles and very little of the foreign press. But you start reading those articles and you start clicking on those links and you realize that the Rockefeller Initiative is spreading worldwide. And, of course, we owe this to Grant Cameron, who got the documents in 2000 that confirm it all, which, of course, are also linked on that page and make it impossible for the Clintons to get away from this. And, by the way, I should mention that Grant Cameron just published a book called hang on, let me make sure I get this right. It just came out. It's on Amazon. Everyone should buy this book. Let me just tell you that. Go buy the book. Don't think about it. Go get this book, and then at some point get Grant to sign it, because a signed first edition of this puppy could be very, very attractive. Hang on, I'm trying to get this page to come up. Darn it. My web is, there we go. Okay, hang on a second. My web right now is not particularly great. The new book out by Grant Cameron is called The Clinton UFO Storybook, E.T. Politics in the White House. And, of course, it's drawing on everything he knows about the Clinton situation, which is a lot, which is at presidentialufo.com, but he's put into a book. This just came out. Again, one more straw on the scale. I mean, it just gets worse and worse for the Clintons. I say it gets worse and worse. I don't think it's worse. I think that Podesta is very smart, and he's playing it pretty well. I would probably do it the way he's doing it. The only risk that he's taking is that, one, a terrorist attack may take place, but that's not a huge risk because the ET issue would be off the table, but the country will suffer. And the idea that somehow she is going to be dramatically harmed by being connected to the ET issue, I think that ship has sailed. I think it's pretty obvious now. And so, but on the other hand, it is, let me put it this way. If you're running for president, and this has been you wanted this your whole life, and you have a chance to be the first woman president, and you're thinking, okay, but let's get this disclosure thing out of the way. In other words, let's get the announcement out of the way that there's an extraterrestrial presence, only the most profound event in human history, and do it in the middle of my campaign. This is tough. This is a tough sell. I get it. I mean, it's like, my God, who knows what'll happen, right? But if you truly put the nation ahead of your own personal interests, if you put the truth very high up on your priority list, and you really want a true legacy, you do that. Now, she's being tested, as few political leaders or aspirants have ever been tested. And Podesta is playing it down the middle right now. But let me be clear. If you go and read and just watch all the videos and read the tweets and everything else that's taken place from the Clintons, the one thing they have accomplished is they have made it clear they consider this issue serious. In other words, the ridicule curtain is theoretically down.
Steve, we got time for one more question for you before we got to let you go, and you got to make your way to Toronto tomorrow. And I think it's more of a comment from Joey in the Spaced Out Radio chat room on Spreaker. Is there a possibility that some of these disclosure emails are sitting on Hillary's server?
Probably not. She would be nuts. I mean, it would have just been insane if she were to allow any ET stuff to be on that server. I don't think she would have done that. It would just be a huge mistake. I doubt it's there.
All right, my friend, tell us about your weekend. What's coming up in Brantford, Ontario at the Alien Cosmic Expo, when people will be able to hear you.
Well, the conference is 3 days. Starts on Friday. There's a lot of contact material there. So contactees, if you're a contactee or you're interested in that, there's a lot of that also. But at the center of the conference is the disclosure, I guess you could say, hearing in which half dozen or so journalists, Canadian journalists, are going to question a panel of about 10 people, which includes Travis Walton and Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, Stanton Friedman, Paul Hellyer, Victor Viggiani, what have you. It's going to be a very powerful 3 hours. And then most of us are then giving 1 hour presentations on Saturday evening or Sunday. That's what's going to take place. It's a significant event. It may get a lot of media coverage in Canada. It's very possible. So that's what's coming up. Beyond that, I am. My goal is to raise enough funds. I need about 12,000. I've got about a couple thousand has come in recently, but I need about 12,000 in order to reset up in Washington. Because my cost, if I'm renting, and I have to rent in this case, I don't have a supporter in Washington to work with, is about at least 2,000 a month, so that I can set up in Washington again and directly deal with the congressional staff, as well as, of course, the Washington media through the election. So that's like 4 months. Well, all of July, August, September, October, 4 months. That's high on my list. So if I get back to Washington, that'll be important. And then drive the media as hard as possible and ultimately start getting on the shows. If I'm getting on CNN, MSNBC, ABC News, if I'm actually turning up as a, quote, commentator, spokesperson for this issue in relation to the campaign, you can just about stick a fork in the truth embargo. But they have held out. I mean, they finally called, but it was 18 months, and the CNN offer was unacceptable. I'm not going to participate in a comic run by Jeannie Mose, who I love. She's wonderful, and it's funny stuff. But you don't know what they're going to do with it going in. It turned out what she did wasn't bad. Stan Friedman was part of it. It was okay, but I don't know that, and so I said no. Maybe it made him upset. ABC News, I had a shot there, but I didn't get the news in time. If they want me on, by God, they'll go make sure it happens. And I want to do in studio. That's the media corridor, Washington to New York. An in-studio interview is 10 times more powerful than a remote. You want to be sitting across that desk from Rachel Maddow or Stephanopoulos or Hayes or McConnell. You want to be in the studio with them. And if I'm in the Washington corridor, I can do that. And so that's pretty much my job for the next 4 months. And get disclosure as soon as possible. I can understand why if they're going to yield to history on this, they're going to wait till after the convention. And they've gone silent since June the 2nd because everything's locked up, no debates and so forth. I can appreciate the fact that get the convention done, that's all out of the way. She is the nominee. She's running for president. And then take those questions, open the door, let the media in. Obama makes the announcement. Disclosure takes place. It probably guarantees her the White House no matter what happens in terms of her own issues, right? But maybe not. I mean, you could make a case it could cost her the White House. I don't think so. Whatever. But it guarantees her place in history, regardless of what happens. I can see that. And so the day after the nominating convention is over, start paying real close attention to the news and to PRG's website. And if you want to be on my updates list, where I'm keeping people on this pretty good, you just need to hit the subscription link on my sites. I got several of them there. Or just email prg@paradigmresearchgroup.org and say subscribe. I've got about 17,000 on the list. I'd love to have 30,000 on the list. So people sign up, but I'm sending out updates on this regularly. But I'm accepting now that if disclosure is going to take place, it will not be until after July 28th and the nominating convention.
Steve Basset, thank you so much for being out radio tonight. Always a pleasure to have you on. I'd like to get you on again around election time or when Hillary gets the official Democratic nomination to see if anything has come up.
Sure, no problem.
We'll talk to you soon. Take care.